I'm going to be talking to you today about accessibility. My name is Catherine Bennett. I'm in the e-learning support department, which means that I'm one of the people that can help you out with your Blackboard questions, your course design questions, and your accessibility questions, right? And Regina's going to be joining us in a little bit, and she's from Disability Support Services, and she's going to be one on the team who is helping any students that you might have with special abilities, special needs. So she'll be working with you on that, and she'll be able to talk a little bit more as to how her department actually works with the students, okay? So, I don't know why I'm walking over here right now. Just a little bit about the difference between accessibility and accommodation. Accommodation is very student-centered. Accommodation works with the student to identify what their abilities are, what their needs are going to be as they go through your class. They personalize and tailor their assistance to get those students through your classes. Accessibility is about the content. Accessibility guidelines are going to affect how you design your content for delivery. It's not student-specific, not tailored to the student, it's tailored to the content. Anything that you're going to be using in your courses needs to be accessible and meet these guidelines. And the reason I want you to know that it's not tailored is because when we're thinking about accessibility, we're dealing with all abilities, right? We're not just talking about disabilities. We could be talking about people who are more of a visual learner, if you believe in the learning types, versus an auditory learner, right? Kinesthetic learner, that kind of a thing. So accessibility sort of dips into the realm of universal design for learning, if you've ever heard that phrase. And if you don't, that's okay too. You're going to learn about it as you go along. So I know that you're sitting there thinking, okay, she just told me that everything I have to put in my class has to be accessible. I'm going to try to make it easy for you, right? I'm going to show you some 5 tips for how you can start thinking about the content that you're going to be putting in your class and how can you go ahead and identify ways to make that a little bit more accessible. And quite frankly, a lot of these tips I'm going to be presenting today are about making it readable, right? Can you read the words on the page or the screen? There we go. So here are our 5 easy ways. Color contrast, choosing readable fonts, composing meaningful alt text, alternative text. We'll define that later. Well-formed hyperlinks, and heading styles and document structure. Right? So, how many people develop stuff in Microsoft Office Word? Right? Or any other word processor program. I realize we've got Mac users out there as well. So these tips can really be applied across platforms. I just clicked the button. All right. So I'm hoping that these are going to be global, and again, just something that you can be thinking about. We're going to be basically designing with accessibility in mind. So, color and contrast. Do we have any color blindness in the room? A little bit, some folks. All right. I used to think that I was not colorblind until I went to the eye doctor one day, and I never had this presented to me before, and they showed me something like this, right? And they said, okay, tell me all of the shapes that you can see, the numbers that you can read, and then I was informed that there was about 5 that I didn't mention. So colorblindness, even though you may not be aware that you have colorblindness, you might still have some indicators there that contrast would even help you out. So we have here some examples of what colorblindness levels would do. So for our people without colorblindness in the room, you should see the first square as the colors in a rainbow. And then the second square is showing a green colorblindness. So if you cannot perceive the color green, you might see way up at the top there how that looks. And here is the absence of red, and then the absence of blue. So just to let you know what different color blindness might do to the colors. And I'm saying this to you because we like to use colors as we're designing, right? To grab attention, for emphasis. So it's just something to be aware of. You know, what potential is there that the color you use is something that might not be picked up? Red and green, the most notorious. This square just demonstrates what happens if you put red on black, right? Goes away. And one of the reasons that I want to point this out to you is because what we really like to do for emphasis and to get attention is red, right? If you have a red color blindness, it's suddenly not getting some students' attention because they see it as black, right? So be aware of that issue. When we talk about contrast, we want to be aware of what's our background, what's in our foreground. Foreground's typically going to be text, right? Our background is going to be the color of the page, that kind of thing. We want to make sure that we have high contrast, so we want to pair a dark background with light colored text or a light background with dark colored text. Viewing online, most of you are going to be working in Blackboard. For viewing online, it's preferable to have a light background with dark text. And going back to the red and the green, if you're wanting to use it as a way to convey meaning, red, stop, green, go, right? Do something else other than just change the color, because like I said, you're going to miss a section of your audience possibly. So in this example, it's just green boxes and red boxes, and if you can perceive those colors, then you know what might be good and what might be bad. If you can't, then this section would help you do it a little bit better, right? The green plus sign, the red X. If you're dealing with text and you're wanting to apply a color to grab attention, then also bold or italicize, okay? So in a nutshell, you're going to have some students who can see all of the colors in the rainbow and some who cannot. Be aware of that. And don't use color alone to convey meaning. That's the biggest thing, right? Don't just rely on putting something in red to indicate that you think it's important to show a deadline. All right. Fonts, that's the next one. How many of you out there have heard of Comic Sans? Isn't that a fun font? Or it was about 10 years ago, right? Yes, that font is not very readable, okay? There are a lot of fonts, unfortunately, that are like that. And a lot of them are built into word processing software so that you can freely choose among them. So really, when you're thinking about your font choices, one of the biggest things you can do is sort of back away from your computer, right? And pretend that you don't know what you've written and see if you can read it. Also, another thing about fonts, this is an image-based font here. The word fonts is written in an image-based font. You really want to use actual fonts rather than going online and getting the characters that you like just because they have the nice flowers. You know, this is purely decorative, but I did have to put in alternative text for these because they are images, right? So a student who would come in here and read this, if I had not put in the alternative text, would be told that there are 5 images on this screen and have no clue what those images are. So use real text rather than graphics or image-based. And I know this might be hard for you guys to read at the back. It's like simple text, right? We want to use a limited number, no more than 3. I often get the question, well, what if I use italics and bold? Well, that's still just a change to one font, right? So I'm not including italicizing or bolding in that. But you might want to use a particular font for your headings and then another font for the text within that heading, right? We've talked about the contrast. Avoid small font sizes. No one would do that, right? Yeah. except for maybe that really verbose student, and you've said, you've got 3 pages to give me this topic, and then they discover they can make it 6-point font, right? And you're like, oh, well, you just got deducted some points, didn't you? No. Only if that's in your rubric. Then you're good. All right. You want to limit the use of bold and italics. Again, you're only going to want to use that for emphasis. If we put too much under emphasis, then we confuse the student. They don't know what is really important or not, right? And then again, the appearance of the font, the color, the shape. You don't want to rely on that to get your point across. And no blinking text. No blinking text. Animated GIFs, again, 15 years ago, really awesome. Now, been played out a little bit. All right, so here's just some examples of don't do's, and I'll pause. I see a hand up.
Yeah, it's okay to do fly-ins on our PowerPoint, right? That's not animated.
Right, a PowerPoint animation, if done correctly in Microsoft Office PowerPoint 2010, will be okay. Animations done in previous versions of PowerPoint might have some problems with.
So if I'm just sliding in, one line at a time.
Right.
To not distract their,
Yeah, that should be fine. All right. So just like I was saying, you don't want to overemphasize. If you have an entire block of text and it's in italics, italics are sort of hard to read, right? And it becomes cumbersome and a burden on the student to try to figure out where their attention is going to be played out. So if you could just italicize, a sentence, no more, hopefully just a phrase, that would be good. The same with bold. Underlining. In today's world, underlining has come to mean a hyperlink. So if you underline text, your students are going to try to click on it. So, is that really maybe an accessibility issue? Well, yes, because now we're talking in that universal design for learning. We don't want to just add a confusion. The student says, I couldn't click on the link, and then you're like, what link? Right? It takes a while to figure that out. Want to make sure that we have good contrast. Decorative fonts are good when used sporadically, but we don't want to use them all the time. Avoid the use of all caps. For a word or a phrase to get attention, that's fine because maybe you are meaning to shout at your students, but otherwise, I'm sure y'all are aware that now all caps in the digital world means that you're angry at someone. So you might want to avoid that because that's one thing your students do know is what texting is about, right? All right, one last thing. I don't really think many people are doing justified text, but I did want to mention it. When you justify the text, that means it's aligned on both the right and the left margins of the page. It can cause some spacing to appear between the words, which reduces that flow of the information. So, fonts. Number one thing, make sure it's readable. 3 fonts or less. Emphasize as you need to, but no more than is necessary. And no blinking fonts. Try to avoid the underlining and all bold. All right, alternative text. Is this term familiar to anybody? A couple folks? All right. I'm not going to call on you. If we were in a smaller group, I'd call on you, but I'm not. So alternative text is the textual, and I don't like to use this word. You're going to be able to use a word I don't like. Textual description of an image, right? But alternative text in the classroom and for our materials is going to go a little bit beyond that. It's going to have to, yes, maybe describe the image, but also describe how it relates to the lesson, making it meaningful, right? This example is one that you would maybe commonly find on the web, right? Most of us are doing shopping on the web nowadays. And you see the image as the one up here. And there's 2 different alt texts provided. One just says credit card logos. And the other one says, Video VC and magic card accepted, right? So let's say something happened to your internet browser as you were loading this particular page that had these images on it. And because you're online and alt text has been applied, instead of seeing the images, you can read the alternative text. Which one of these provides you with the best information? Option 2. So that's where we get into that meaningful. Because option 1 is correct. Yes, those are credit card logos. But when I'm going to check out and make sure that I can buy my kids that special backpack they wanted, which I just had to do, I know that I've got the credit card that they will accept. So sometimes it's just as simple as that. For those of you who are working in Word, applying alt text is not that difficult. You're not going to be required to remember this, but I just wanted to show you the steps. The image, you would right-click on the image. You would come down to Format Picture. You would find your alt text tab here that's circled, and then you're presented with 2 areas to type into. The title area is where you're going to type in your alt text, and then if you need more than 80 characters to describe it, you're going to use the long description area. When we get a little bit trickier with the alt text, is when we start thinking, how is this going to work in our lesson? Right? So here we have an image, right? So a description would be less the Capitol dome, right? Fairly familiar, hopefully, with everybody. But when you're typing the alt text for this, you need to be thinking about what is this in relation to the lesson, right? Is it a political science class? Is it an architecture class? Is it a history class? Is it a geography class? Right? Because it could just be that you're using this image to say Washington, D.C., right? Or you could be using this image for the statue at the top, or to identify these columns. Lots of different ways that we could be using them. You're going to have one way that you're using the image, and you need to make sure that your alternative text conveys that. So alternative text, 80 characters or less. When you need more than that, that's when we get into the world of the long description. Typically, we do have long descriptions when we have charts and graphs involved. In this particular example, this is a screenshot of a page. So instead of hiding the long description in that area in the Word, it's actually been typed out into the document, right? So our alt text for the chart up there might just be the title of it. And then we've got our long description down here, so we don't need to provide that again. Because in Microsoft Office Word, whatever you type into the description area is only going to be available to those students who are using a screen reader. The screen reader is going to read it to them. It's not going to be available to all. And that's sort of where that accessibility meets up with that universal design again, right? If it's important enough to explain as a long description, maybe it's important enough for all of your students to see it presented in that way. So, alt text. Make sure that your alt text for the image is equivalent to that image in its place in your lesson. Hyperlinks. Everybody knows what a hyperlink is? I'm sorry, got a question, I missed it.
If you're doing screenshots, taken through a program, do those screenshots have alt text? I mean, if you put words, it's going to be like step 1, step 2, there's words there. Would those screenshots require text, alt text? Is that a iffy area?
I got you. In a Word document, they are going to require alt text, and that is because Microsoft products at this moment do not accept the null tag, which would be open quote, close quote. A null tag would allow a screen reader to skip that image as though it were not there, and if your step is well defined and correlates with that image very clearly, that would be acceptable. But in the world of Microsoft where we can't put in the null, you would need just to put in like a short phrase.
Okay.
What's the screenshot of? It's of the Windows dialog box, the Save As dialog box, something like that. All right. All right, so hyperlinks. When it's well formed, a hyperlink should tell you where you're going and what else might happen to you when you click on it, right? So this page has got the bad and the slightly better, right? We don't want to say click here because we don't know what's going to happen at all. Where is it going to take us, right? Is it going to take me something that might be a little bit beyond where I am now? Maybe I want to read a little bit more before I click on it, that kind of a thing. Instead, we're going to say a little bit more about it. You know, instructions on how to use the new Wake Tech calendar here. Yeah. Well, now I know you're going to take me to an instruction page. So if I was confused about the calendar, I know I can click on this to learn about more. If I'm not confused about it, then I know I can continue on with the lesson. Getting a little bit better, we're going to make sure that we address all of our questions. Where is the link going? Why is the link provided? Sometimes those work together. And then what else is going to happen? So I'm going to send somebody out to look at the weather radar. I'm going to tell them that they're going to WRAL's website. Why are they going there? To look at the radar. What else might happen to them? It's going to open in a new window, right? The opens in a new window is key for our screen reader users because it's going to shift the focus of that program. And it alerts them that now your screen reader will, once you click on this link, your screen reader is going to start reading to you a web page that's in a different window. That way they know when they're done listening that they can return to the previous window that they were on. So it gives them that cue. I'm going to need to come back to the first window, right? At Wake Tech, we ask that you put opens in a new window on any external link because it also alerts all of the other users that they are now leaving a Blackboard site. They're now leaving Blackboard, right? You're sending them outside. You're sending them off campus, right? They're going on a field trip. Let them know that that's going on. So just remember the 3 questions that the hyperlink is supposed to answer. Another thing that you're going to want to include along with your hyperlink is going to be the web address or the URL. And that's in case something happens with that link and the student clicks on it and the page doesn't load. They can then copy and paste the web address or URL. But you don't just want to provide the URL because then you're going to have students listening to http://www. Right? Don't really want to do that to them. That's cruel and unusual punishment. All right. Headings and document structure. If you're familiar with Word, you've probably seen the styles area. Hopefully you haven't ignored it. No? Nobody out there? All right, good. I try to make you guys laugh and you're back from lunch, you don't care. But to build in document structure and to provide an ease of navigation for your students, you do want to make sure that you use the styles area. Use your heading 1s, 2s, and 3s to set up a document structure. I have examples. That's the good one. All right. So here we have Grumpy Cat's syllabus. I've got the accessibility checker running, which is available to you in Microsoft Office 2010, and it tells you that there are a slew of errors. But don't worry. Down here, if you click on one of them, it's going to tell you how to fix it, right? In the other pane, you've got the navigation of the document. Any headings that would help a student navigate this document would be listed there. So this syllabus needed some help. And it got some. Run through the accessibility checker, got it down to a tip. If you ever use a table, that's about the best you're going to be able to get because it's going to want you to make sure that the reading order is okay in the table. And now that navigation pane is complete. So as a student, I can come in and I can say, all right, in the 5 minutes that I had to read this last time, I got down to the FERPA statement. I can click in the navigation pane and be brought directly there. So again, a little bit of that universal design. So the headings and styles in a nutshell, make sure that you use them. Also use Word's built-in tools, the numbered lists, the bulleted lists, instead of typing in your own numbers, that kind of thing. And my biggest tip, honestly, is to just keep the navigation pane and the accessibility checker open at all times. Yes?
How do you get to the accessibility checker?
File, information, check for issues, and underneath that button, check for accessibility. All right. Are there any questions for me before I turn the mic over? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay. For how to find the, I'll do you one better. Just to make sure I'm doing this the accessible way, I will speak visually as I also demonstrate it, right? So to get to the accessibility checker, you would go under the File menu. Info should open up by default. You're going to look for Check for Issues and check accessibility. Okay. Did that get your question? Oh, yes, ma'am.
Back to your PowerPoint.
Oh,
What font are you using there? Because that's like a fancy font.
that is a fancy font. Ah, see? I was waiting for someone to catch me on the fancy font. How did y'all find that? Did y'all find it was easy to read?
Okay.
Right? It's okay for a certain distance, right? But that one slide where I had all of the bullet points out there, maybe that was a little bit much with that fancy font, right? And to be honest, I can't remember. I want to say it was Lucinda's script, but I'm not sure. All right. All right, anything else?
My name is Regina Willis, and I'm the Director of Disability Support Services, and our office is located in Holding Hall. And I'm here this afternoon to give you just a few pointers because the information about disability support services and how students get connected is pretty extensive. So I'm going to tell you what your role will be in it. And unfortunately, I don't have enough of these. I wasn't expecting quite as many. So I'm going to ask you if you would just pass these out and share. This is one of our testing accommodation forms. And I want you to just have these, just pass them down and let them go as far as they'll go. I'll explain it to you. If you don't mind, could I have one of those? I'll just share it with you. Because I want to make sure I touch all the points. See, did I go the wrong way? Okay, I must be going the wrong way. Am I going the wrong way? No, they put too much stuff on here. This is everything she told you not to do. And you won't believe that my staff put this together for me. I said, hey, check this out and make sure it's accessible. And you see what they did. Okay. We're going to talk about reasonable accommodations and who's responsible for providing the access. The Disability Support Service Office is responsible for providing access for students with disabilities. What we do is make sure that the students can access their course material, their textbooks. Sometimes it's necessary for us to make sure that they can access the work that they have to do outside of the classroom, particularly if that information is in Blackboard or it's not accessible. And I'll give you a quick example. We recently went to the math modules. And when we went to the math modules for our visually impaired student, that was really a nightmare because that was not accessible. So what we had to do was go a little bit beyond what we normally do in helping those students access the material that was in Blackboard, accessing the materials that was in My Math Lab. Typically, the students are responsible for any out-of-class assignments and homework and that sort of thing, but we're responsible for any course material. So that may mean tests, that may mean handouts or anything of that nature. We were talking today earlier about accessibility. So then we talk about accommodations. If you're just trying to make your information accessible and you don't have a student in the class with a disability, we're talking just universal design so that in the future, if you have a student in there or if you use that information, it is accessible. If you have a student in your course with a disability, it's an accommodation, and we have to do it. The student, again, is responsible for identifying themselves. They come to the office, they bring us their documentation, we review their documentation, and based on their disability and based on the disability documentation they provide, we give them accommodations, and I'm going to use two words, and I want you to remember these two words, that are both reasonable and appropriate. The accommodations that we give to our students should never give them an unfair advantage over their non-disabled peers. That's key. So the accommodations are strictly for access. In disability support services, of course, yes, we do want our students to be successful, but our accommodations are not guaranteed for success. And I'll just divert here one moment. When they come out of high school, they're under IDEA, Individualized Plan for Students with Disability. When they come to college, they're under the ADA, and the ADA lets them have access to materials, to programs, and to facilities. We're not here to guarantee success, so that's key. The institution does not provide any kind of personal care attendance. That's another thing that in high school they may have that or they may allow for that. We allow for it. You may have a student in your classroom with a personal care attendant, a PCA, but the college is not responsible for providing that. The individual has to provide that. Okay. Again, I don't know what my staff did. How are reasonable accommodations determined? Again, it's determined based on the documentation that the student provides. They then have an initial interview with their coordinator. And once they determine what the accommodations will get, we draw up an accommodation notice. When the student registers for classes, or prior to them registering for classes, they will fill out an accommodation request form. That accommodation request form gives the people in my office permission to send you, the instructor, a copy of that student's accommodation notice. On that accommodation notice, it will tell you the accommodations that the student in your class will receive. It'll tell you if they need extended time. It'll tell you if they are going to have material in an alternate format. It will tell you if they need breaks. It will give you a little bit of information about that student. Extensive information can be sought from their coordinator. And on the email, we're doing it electronically now, on the email, it will tell you who the student's coordinator is, disability service coordinator, and it will give you their contact information. Please utilize that. Call that coordinator and ask questions. Sometimes for new faculty, which all of you are, if they see a textbook in an alternate format, they automatically assume that it is their responsibility to put that textbook in an alternate format, or handouts in an alternate format, and even the test. That's our responsibility. The textbook, the student purchases it just like any other student. They bring us the receipt. We put the textbook in an alternate format, if that means burning it to a CD or enlarging it, and sometimes, on rare occasions, we do some Braille. So that's our responsibility, even with the test. If that student has a test, we're going to put that test in an alternate format. What is your responsibility? To get the material to us in a timely manner. We have some students, blind students that's taking biology this semester. We have been working all summer on her course materials with her instructor, making sure that it is accessible. And again, that's where I said some of the stuff had to be put in Braille so that she could have access to it. So that there's a clear delineation of responsibility. The student has their responsibility to connect with us, and then your responsibility to get us the material in a timely manner. Okay, let me go on. Just briefly, I kind of went over that and talked about the fact that the student has to self-identify and the student has to provide us with their documentation. And then they meet with the coordinator and they talk about the accommodations that the student is going to receive. We don't do any testing here. We don't determine what the disability is. They've already been tested and they bring us that information. And the DSS coordinator is really your connection to that student and to the services. I passed out these test forms, and we have some more in the office. I didn't realize there were going to be such a large audience this afternoon. But these are very important, and I want to take a moment to explain these to you because you're going to see them if you have a student in your class with a disability. We have two forms here. This goal form is like the student's permit to schedule. So what they will do is bring this goal form to you, and then they've done the top portion of it. It's very easy. They will put their name in the class. You're going to do everything that's in the box. You're going to tell us, meaning the Disability Support Service staff, the date of the exam. How much time will the class receive for the exam? Because based on that, we're going to determine how much extended time that student will receive. And then sign it. Give this back to the student. The student will then bring this back to us and schedule their test. Right now, this is about the easiest way we could do this because we want the student to assume some responsibility in this process. So they're completing the top part, you're completing everything in the box, then the student is returning it to us to schedule the test. Question?
Are there DSS services on all campuses?
Yes, ma'am, there is. That's a good question. The green form is your responsibility. Put that away. The green form, again, the student's going to put their information on the top, the class, and the date that they give this to you. You keep this. Keep the green one. On the green form, you are telling us, again, the date of the exam, but you're telling us what they can and cannot take into that testing situation because they're going to more than likely be testing in our office area. We have a small little testing center and we have some computers in there. The room is monitored. We have a test proctor. So we're going to allow them to take in whatever you say they can take in. And sometimes with math, they can have a calculator. Sometimes they can't have a calculator. We need for you to tell us that. Sometimes in chemistry, they can have access to the periodic table of elements. Sometimes they cannot. For writing, sometimes they can use their textbooks. Sometimes they can have some pre-writing to go in there. So we're only going to allow them to take into that testing room what you have indicated they can take in there on this form here. Again, we want you to sign it. Then attach this to the test when you return it to us. You can return a test in a number of ways. You can send it to us electronically, and again, tell us what you are going to allow them to utilize. You can bring it to our office, or you can put it in the drop boxes. Now, it would take one of my administrative staff to tell you exactly where the drop boxes are located, but the administrative staffs in your area could tell you where the drop boxes are located as well. We're not going to let that student take anything into that testing situation that you have not indicated on here. And believe you me, we've had some students say, well, at the last minute, my instructor told the whole class that we could use our notes, but it's not on here. So we're going to do one of two things. We're going to call you and say, John is here right now, Mr. Jones, and he indicated that the class is going to be allowed to use their notes. Is that correct? And if you say yes, we're going to let John take the notes in. If you say no, of course, we're not going to let him take the notes in. Or we'll say, well, John, we don't have that information. We're going to let you wait until we can get in contact with the instructor. So then we might call you and leave a message and say, John gave us some information that wasn't on his testing form. Is that correct? And then if you say yes, we'll get up with John and say, John, you can take the test at this time. So this form will be attached to the test, or you would indicate some way, somehow, if you send an email, what they can and cannot use. Are there any questions about these forms? Yes, sir.
What about a laboratory test that includes specialized equipment or hazardous chemicals or something like that?
Okay, for labs, we do not do this like any kind of chemistry up there, identifying things. Now for the geology class, we did have an instructor that allowed the student to go in early and begin her process. So the instructors have made some accommodation when there's some specialized equipment necessary. Other questions regarding these forms? Okay. So these are very important, and you're going to have students that are going to be utilizing this accommodation because we have quite a few students that do have extended time testing. We have some students that have a scribe, and all of this information would be on their accommodation notice. We have some students that, for whatever reason, they have some processing difficulties, so they might need to read out loud so they can hear themselves while they're reading. They would test in our area. We've been fortunate here lately with the distance ed testing centers that if a student just needs extended time, particularly if you're on the Western Wake campus, because we don't have a presence there right now, so we have made some coordinated efforts so that the distance ed testing center will test those students that just need extended time. We have some students that, like I said, need some assistance, or we have some students that are distracting in a testing environment. So those students, we still work with them. Are there any questions before I move on? Okay. All right. I just want to talk here briefly about reasonable accommodations in higher education realm. All right, I've already said that the accommodations are, one, reasonable and appropriate. Two, the accommodations cannot be denied. By law, you cannot deny the accommodations. They can't be challenged, they can't be denied. The other thing, the accommodation, we're not looking to, in any way, shape, or form, alter the curriculum. So again, I got to go back to high school and do my comparison. In high school, students, maybe the class had to do a 10-page paper. So the student with a disability may have to do 7-page paper or a 5-page paper. In college, again, remember I said we are accommodating the student. If the class has to do a 10-page paper, the student with the disability will also have to do a 10-page paper. We're just going to give them the accommodation. We're going to, what we call, level the playing ground so that they don't have any obstacles or hurdles and they can compete as their non-disabled peers. Again, your disability service coordinator is going to be your point of contact. They're going to let you know what the student can and cannot use. The other thing that we really try to steer our students away from is using their disability as a crutch or letting it become an obstacle. Oh, I couldn't get here because. If that's the case, they need to coordinate that with their disability service provider. We do have students that have medical conditions that flare up unexpectedly. We ask those students to contact their coordinator, but we also ask them to assume responsibility and contact the instructor and let them know what's going on. And we make a clear distinction between what is common and would happen to everybody else and what's related to your disability. If you have the flu, everybody has the flu. So that's not a disability-related absence. But if you have a depressive episode, or they're changing your medications and you have a reaction to it, or you have a hospitalization as a result of your disability, that's a disability-related absence. And we've worked extensively. We're now under Dean Laura Caldwell and under the curriculum side of the house, and we've worked extensively with leniency to the attendance policy. And we're working on giving the instructors more flexibility with utilizing that, because we do have students that have disabilities that will cause them to be absent more often than the attendance policy will allow for. I saw a hand.
How lenient do we need to be? I mean, for example, if, because I had there was a depressive episode is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But it led to 4 weeks of them gone. At some point, when does their disability start to hinder the actual education that we can give them?
Right, that's a wonderful question. And you, as the instructor, have to determine when that student has missed too much to benefit from instruction. Remember that. When have they missed too much to benefit from instruction? So if they've missed a week and maybe they can make that work up, make that test up, and you're willing, that's fine. We also look at the nature of the course, and we say, for instance, maybe a writing course where you can go online and get access to the notes, or you're working independently, or you can get another student's notes or something like that, versus a science course where, now, we did this lab last week, and it's going to build on the lab we're going to do this week, and you've missed both of these labs, so now you can't do what we're going to do this week. You understand? So that's what that leniency with the attendance policy will allow you as the instructor to do and to determine. Yes, ma'am.
Do severe DSS students, do they automatically have FERPA forms? Maybe they found something like maybe a student with Asperger's, who's like very severe.
Yes, very good question. FERPA applies to any student here at Wake Tech. Any student coming to Wake Tech can fill out a FERPA form giving parents or whomever access to their information. We do have students here, and we've increased our population significantly, especially if you're at the North Campus. You will see a large population of students with autism Asperger's syndrome. On this campus, we tend to have some students that have some behaviors related to their disability. And they don't necessarily have a FERPA form, but we indicate on the form that this student may have some behaviors related. So what do? Again, that student is held to the same standards, and they're held to the same code of conduct. When you're talking with that coordinator, you and that coordinator can develop some signals or things that may help that student monitor and manage their behavior in the classroom. However, if that does not work and that student's behavior becomes disruptive to the learning environment, we have what is called a Form 1069. I understand you all may be learning more about that later, but you can file that form online, and they have to go through the same process as any other student, even the appeal process, because they've broken the code of conduct. So they may have to meet with the dean of student, and sometimes it may result in a suspension. So we hold our students to the same standards. Okay, yes ma'am. Good questions.
The accommodation letter is sent to us, but then is it the student's responsibility to come up to the instructor and say, I need these accommodations?
Absolutely, because a student can decide, well now I'm very good in math, and so I probably won't need to use my extended time for my math course. However, I am very bad in writing, and I need my extended time. I need time to think. I need time to process this information. I may need to use my laptop. So they may not come up to the math instructor because they're not going to utilize any accommodations. But for the English instructor, we encourage them, talking about self-advocacy. That's one of the things that the coordinators are working with the students very diligently on, becoming their own self-advocates. Because in high school, everybody handled the process for them. The parents, the counselors, the teachers. Very often, they're not even involved in the process. When they get to their class, all of their accommodations are there. They get extended time, or if they have curriculum assistance, they may go and finish their work. So this is very different for them, but it is their responsibility to step up and say something to the instructor and let the instructor know that they're going to be utilizing their accommodations. To that end, I'd like to add this as well. What if I'm taking a math class and I'm very, very good at math, but now the test is going to, in the end, it's going to be cumulative and it's going to have a lot of stuff on it from the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester. Oh my goodness, so now I'm in a panic state. I want to use my extended time as an accommodation. They can do that. They can do that. However, they cannot fail a test and say, I should have used my extended time as an accommodation and I performed poorly. Ms. Smith, I'm a student with a disability and I didn't use my extended time as an accommodation, but I have it, and now I want to retake that other test. Your reply should be, sorry. I do understand that you are a student with a disability, and you do have the accommodation of extended time, and I strongly advise you to take advantage of it in the future. However, this test, this grade will stand. Other questions? Yes.
I have a question about students with the leniency on the absences. Is there an official kind of procedure at the beginning of the semester that, you know, they should let you know, or some kind of documentation they should bring you? Because in the past, I mean, I had a couple of students with like homes and things like that, and we just kind of did it on our own. They were like, look, I got this condition, you know, there was some absences, but is there some kind of official documentation they should bring me in addition to that? Or, you know, how do we verify that, you know, this is just...
If a student comes up to you and say, I have Crohn's disease and I'm likely to be absent, not every student with a disability will connect with the Disability Support Service office. So I think even on the syllabus now, or they're encouraging faculty to put something on there about disability support services. A lot of students have lived with this all their lives, so they know how to manage it. So if you have a student that comes up to you and says, I have Crohn's disease and, you know, it flares up, I may be absent, or during the test I might need to run out and go to the bathroom, have you connected with Disability Support Service on campus? Because I really can't give you those accommodations. That really has to come through the Disability Support Service office. That's the best way to handle that. You had a question?
I have a participation with the DSS about vision impaired students for my online class. Who are you in contact to make sure that I know what I have to do? Because the class is 100% online.
You should be receiving her accommodation notice, and if she needs extended time on her testing, or she probably will test with us because she'll probably need some assistance. So you still, even though it's an online class, you still should receive her accommodation notice.
What about the book is not, you know, I don't know how she would probably say that after DSS the whole time?
No, for her textbook, we'll put that in an alternate format for her and give it to her on a CD. And many of our blind students are very apt at using the software for blind and visually impaired individuals, so she'll probably utilize that. And then she probably will do her testing with us as well. Or maybe she is very good at using the software, and if you don't have any radio numbers and so forth and so on, JAWS will read that. Okay, other questions? Good questions, thank you. Let me see what this next slide says. I'm really gonna get my staff for this presentation. Just talking about some accommodations for our students that are blind and visually impaired, and that population has also increased. And we do a lot on this campus for that population. For instance, with the math, when it was not accessible, the math department worked with us. They gave us some time out of class, an instructor that would help the students outside of class, an instructor that helped the student during the class, and it was necessary for us to put someone in the class to help the student with the homework and that kind of thing because it was not accessible. Let me go down real quick and talk about our deaf and hard of hearing population. We put videotapes, we have now a whole list of videotapes, particularly for those people that may be teaching Psych 150. Am I right? Okay, we have a whole listing of videotapes that have already been captioned. So that's really a big plus. Sandy Fox is the coordinator for students that are deaf and hard of hearing, so you might want to contact Sandy, or you can contact Catherine, right? Maybe if you need one of those videos, or just to see what we have available. But Sandy Fox is the point of contact, particularly if it's for a student that's already in that class. You probably will have a sign language interpreter in that class. And one thing, very, very, very important, if you have a sign language interpreter in the class, the sign language interpreter is going to do just that. They're going to interpret everything that the student is saying. They're going to interpret mostly everything that goes on in the classroom if they can do it. Like if people are asking questions, that will be interpreted. Whatever you're saying, they will sign that, and whatever the deaf student's saying. Just to give you a little funny ha-ha for the afternoon, we had a sign language interpreter in a class, and the interpreter was talking, and the instructor would look to the interpreter. I guess they weren't realizing that she was interpreting for the student. So then the instructor would go back to teaching, and then the deaf student would say something else, and the interpreter would sign it. And so the instructor turned to the interpreter and said, I do not see your name on the roster. Are you registered for this class? Did not realize, and so the interpreter was signing that to the student. I mean, I don't know that the interpreter knew that the instructor was talking to her, so she signed that to the student, so the student was signing, yes. What do you mean? Yes, I'm registered for this class. I pay my money like everyone else. So just a little funny aside. But the sign language interpreters, and they normally going to sit near the front of the room. The deaf student will probably sit in the front of the room as well. And whatever you're saying, this sign language interpreter will interpret, and whatever the deaf student says, the sign language interpreter will voice. So that's for our deaf population. Normally for our deaf students, they don't utilize extended time unless, of course, that's a part of their disability. Like if they have a learning disability of some sort and they need to have extended time, they'll utilize that. But for most of our deaf students, they're going to have a sign language interpreter in the classroom. And we encourage them to see if they can find someone in the class that will volunteer to take notes. Now, particularly if you're doing any of those pre-curriculum classes, you know, everybody's kind of at the same level and everybody's just learning and, you know, nobody wants to volunteer. So if, as the instructor, you could kind of encourage that, we in Disability Support Services would greatly appreciate it. The last resort, if you cannot get a student, if at all possible, as the instructor, you could make your notes somehow available to the deaf student, that would be a tremendous help. It is very difficult for the deaf student to watch the interpreter and then try to take notes. So that's why we ask them to get a volunteer note taker or get the instructor's notes. While I'm talking about deaf students, I also want to talk about something really cool that we did this semester with one of our latent deaf adults, and we will be doing it on the North Campus. It's called Remote CART. It's captioning at real time. That's what CART stands for, C-A-R-T, captioning at real time. Now, remote, the lady was wherever she was, and then the student was here, and they had the microphone set up, and so as the instructor's talking, this woman is there typing, the student has a laptop in front of them, and the information is popping up on the laptop. So that's way cool. So I just say heads up, technology. And to our IT department, I mean, we really rocked and rolled with that. That was something new for us this semester. This semester, we're going to have on-site CART. So we'll have a person seated in the class next to the deaf student. The person will have a laptop, the deaf student will have a laptop, and the person will be typing madly as the instructor is talking, and the information will be popping up on the student's laptop. The technology, I love it. So, and then we also have, what is it called? Oh my gosh, it just went out of my mind. But it's a sign language type when the student, cute speech, thank you, when they're trying to, you know, they show where the placement of the tongue is. We haven't had anyone use cute speech in a while, but that's something else too. So now, and we've got something else called C-print. So that's another one where we'll have a person seated in the class, the student will have a laptop in front of them, they'll be typing madly, and then the information will come up on the laptop. So if you have that in your class, and you realize that, please try to ask the other students, like if they're asking questions, to not talk all at one time, because it's really important that the person hear what they're saying. I think they're giving me the high sign. Another question? Yes, I'm sorry.
If we turn over like a test or a textbook where y'all put it in an alternative format, does it come back to the instructor to be verified, or? No. The textbooks, we have Missy Patinelli. She is our assistant technology specialist. She's really good at what she does. She runs those books through a high-speed scanner, formats them, and cleans it up and everything, and then she burns it to a CD. The test, now for our foreign language, because we don't speak the language and we want to make sure the student has access to everything that they should have access to, we do coordinate that with the instructor and make sure that things are correct. Other questions? I think, is my time up? Okay, all right. I'm sorry, my time is up. I thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to come to our office. We're in Holding Hall. Thank you.